Jesus. Now that's a little irresponsible there. Anyway, so I went to Harvard and there really started getting more deeply into it, I guess. I had a friend I remember who was a big Doors fan, and he went around he was actually my roommate. He never stopped singing Doors songs. And he also had gone to high school with Graham Parsons in Jacksonville, Florida. And he knew he had all the International Submarine,
Right.
what was it, International Submarine School?
International Submarine Band.
Band, yeah, and stuff like that. And there was a club called the Boston Tea Party, which was an amazing place. It had, I remember seeing the Byrds, I remember seeing the Yardbirds, I remember seeing the Velvet Underground. I mean, all these bands came to that place. And the Velvet Underground played the Harvard Jubilee weekend our freshman year, which was pretty far out in itself. So it was a real melting pot of influences in Boston. And anyway, with Jerry Harrison was another one of, he was in this same sort of mini dormitory with me and the guy who was the Graham Parsons and Jim Morrison fan. And we started talking about music, and he was from Milwaukee, and he had been in a lot of blues bands, and he knew how to play. I mean, he was already an experienced, much more experienced than me. He played a few gigs, but not a lot. And he'd played like for years. So we talked about having a band, and we found a great guitar player, and we found a drummer, and we started playing college mixers. And this band was called Albatross. And our zenith was opening for a big rally, because this was the time, I think it was sophomore year or junior year, when everything hit the proverbial fan with, the protests against the Vietnam War, Nixon, and so I was in a branch of SDS and was part of the occupation of, what was it? Yeah, University Hall, the administrative building, and almost got my head beaten. There's a funny picture that made it in a lot of papers, and you see me coming down the steps, and there's a cop like this with his baton. It looks like I'm about to get hit, but he hit the next guy. Or the guy, I don't know, whatever. So I lucked out, but it was, it was that time. And anyway, the Grateful Dead played a big student rally, and somehow I got the number of Ron Cutler, who was their road manager. He was the guy who had worked with the Stones. And we ended up opening for them in this, because we're we're committed, we want to be part of this, so they let us use their equipment.
Wow.
And we played on the steps of MIT for these thousands of students. And then we said, party at our apartment. And Jerry Garcia, Phil Lesh, all those they came, and they stayed all night. And they took acid. They did what the Grateful Dead were supposed to do. They even jammed.
Wow.
In our apartment. We had this big, I remember we had a big apartment on Putnam Avenue right near Harvard Yard. And Jerry and I and two other guys. I don't know if I identified Jerry Harrison, who was in the Modern Lovers later with me, and then went on to the Talking Heads. There was a guy named Danny Fields.
Yeah, sure.
There's a movie out about him called
He's a
Danny
legend,
Says, which I haven't seen, but I do see him every once in a while. And I'm trying to remember if Jerry saw Jonathan play. He used to play on the Cambridge Common, solo or with David Robinson and then another bassist, but it was really amazing because John and I went, Jerry said, you got to come see this guy in Cambridge Commons. And he wore a suit, and he had very short hair, and he had a Jazzmaster guitar with 2 strings, plastered with Howard Johnson stickers, and painted, I don't know if you remember the Howard Johnson's colors.
Red orange.
Yeah,
Orange and blue.
Yeah.
That's right.
And
The Powder Baby. Yes.
he had a song called I See the Restaurant, It Is My Friend. And he basically would play these 2 strings, which sort of was an E minor, I think.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the first Modern Lover
Yeah.
albums, there's a lot of E minor on
Yeah.
that album. Pablo Picasso is just E minor.
That's it.
Yeah.
So he figured out a way to be incredibly creative with this really minimal, you know, it's so funny because you think of all the minimalism that came after. Jonathan was, in a way, a minimalist. Of course, as he expanded his repertoire, it got more complicated. But anyway, and then I don't think we had any contact with him, but then Danny Fields, who I think Jonathan was always in love with the Velvet Underground.
Yeah, sure.
And somehow he and Danny met, because Jonathan lived out in the suburbs and we were in Cambridge. And anyway, one day Danny brought him to our apartment. And I remember clearly that time he was wearing a white plastic motorcycle jacket. And he started singing one of his songs and dancing on our rug in our living room. And we sort of said, well, and then he said he was looking to flesh out and build his band. And then shortly after that, Jerry and I said, yeah. So it was David Robinson, Jerry, myself, and Jonathan, and then John Felice,
Right.
who came and went.
Mhm.
We had a very complex, sometimes difficult relationship with Jonathan,
Mhm.
because I think they knew each other so well.
Mm.
So they'd grown up together in Natick, Mass.
Mhm.
And then he, at some point when he kind of left, he went and started the Real Kids, which
Right.
ended up being a fabled
Yeah.
Boston area band. But anyway, so that, you know, we started playing, and then I'm trying to think about it. It's all suddenly happened. What's funny about the Modern Lovers, we didn't play a lot because we couldn't get a lot of gigs because, you know, people weren't listening to that music. And
Right, no,
we,
that was-
and we would I remember clearly playing one time at the Cambridge Common. I think there's some pictures of it, but we do that song, I'm Straight,
Mhm.
and nobody was straight. They were all stoned. And they even, we go, I'm straight, and they say, we're stoned, and we're, you know, it was pretty interesting. You know, we got their attention. Then, you know, the message of, you know, I want a girl I care about, or I want nothing at all, you know.
Mhm.
And that was, you know, that was the era of getting stoned, having as much sex with as many people as possible. I mean, it was, you know, it was definitely against the stream, so to speak. And then I think through Danny alerting Lillian Roxon, who wrote for the Daily News,
Right.
and she came up and heard us play, and then she wrote about it in the Daily News, just a little column, and then all of a sudden the record companies showed up, and I remember Clive Davis coming and hearing us at Ringe Tech. It was like a high school in North Cambridge, and I think we had a Shure vocal master for our PA, and he spent the whole set with his head against the PA, so he could, because he's into lyrics and
Right.
that, and then he said, these could be taken on many different levels. We said, yes, Clive, that's true. And then he offered us what was for then a very large record deal fairly quickly,
And did he?
which we turned down because we were so pretentious. We said, well, we got to go see everybody before we make a decision.
And then how did John Cale come into the picture?
He came in because then when the Warner people came in to see us and again started offering us a deal, they held out the name of John Cale as a producer because Cale was signed as a staff producer for Warner's. And through the Velvet's connection, and we loved how he produced the first Nico album and the first Stooges album. So that was another thing. Jonathan and Jerry and I all loved the first Stooges album for the songs, for the performance, for the sound.
Right. And what was it like working with John?
Well, I'd say John was, he was a great engineer. In terms of producing us, he was not in the best shape, and we weren't easy. So it was a sort of volatile mixture. I mean, I'd say it worked okay for the thing that actually became the first album. But that was like a demo tape where we just basically played everything as though we were playing a set. And we had absolutely no vision that that would be the album. That was just a demo. And then when we came back a year after that, I think that was in the spring of '71, we, you know, and Cale was trying to then sort of whip it into shape. It's okay, this is the real thing. And by then, Jonathan had already started to move into different kind of music, and John would say, you have to look like you want to kill somebody when you play that guitar solo. You have to be intense, you have to be mean. And John would say, well, I don't feel that way, I can't play that way. And you know, so then it was just, it got pretty dicey.
What was your role? What did you feel your role was in the Modern Lovers? Just
Well, the psychological role was shuttle diplomat after a while, because Dave, who's, you know, had a big influence on the Modern Lovers sound, as he did with the Cars, was he loved really concise, well organized, disciplined pop music. You know, he loved bands like Crazy Elephant and you know, stuff from the Buddha era. And while I'd say that we all had different tastes and stuff, but the thing with Jonathan was to try to get him in the studio to really try to be able to do, you know, get the excitement that you get on stage,
Right.
but also, you know, play it right. And but in terms of shuttle diplomacy, I'd say Jerry and I were then the back and forth with the business end of things. Maybe. I liked it, though I can't say that. I mean, I don't think that I was very successful, because I keep thinking that, God, I mean, people still tell me that. This guy who called me worked for A&M then, which also made an offer and actually recorded, I think one of the songs that's on that record is from a demo that we did for them, and he's saying, you know, the greatest band that never was, because we played so few shows, and you know, and Steve Albini called me, you know who he is, right?
Yeah, of course.
About a year and a half ago, asking, you know, you could do this festival if you guys would get together and play. But I said, well, I'll give it a shot, but I don't think Jonathan will go for it. Which,
How does it feel that that record has sort of become legendary? I mean, it's always on the best, whenever you pick up a best records list, it's there.
I think it's a testament to that it has some kind of raw charm, but then again, and also the songs really say something. And I think it's still valid, you know. It's as important for kids maybe to hear that today as it was back then. Yeah. And I think also, it was important in the sense, the reason the band was important is we were the first one, or one of the first ones, that it was not about how well people could play their instrument at all, because we were really rough. I mean, I don't know if you've listened to that live album, The Precise Line. I mean, it's really out of tune. It's really, some of it sounds pretty bad, but the spirit was spirit and feeling. Interestingly, you know, I went to a memorial service for Ornette Coleman about 4 weeks ago, in the Riverside Church, that enormous church up there, and I guess his son was talking, and they talked about how he was one of the people who paved the way for punk and new wave, which I'd never thought of, even though I should have, because my neighbor for many years was Don Cherry, who was one of his sidemen. And but the idea that he said, the musicians would say, what should I play? And he said, play what you feel. You know, even to the point, he said, don't look at the score, just play what you feel. And I guess that's what came out of the punk and new wave that came after us. Yeah. It's the idea that virtuosity had nothing to do with what you could do in terms of making something that had meaning.